You're listening to the Huddle Up Podcast with Chad Jensen and Zack Kelberman. Join Broncos Country's deep divers at milehighhuddle.com and sound off. And now it's time to drop some knowledge.
Welcome in, everybody, to the Huddle Up Podcast, presented, as always, by Mile High Huddle and 24/7 Sports. I'm your host, Chad Jensen, and with me, as always, is my partner in crime. You know him and love him, is your Denver Broncos reporter for 24/7 Sports. He is Zack Kelberman. Zack, it was poetic. I don't know if you could even call it justice. It was poetic karma that Champ Bailey, we got the news on Monday, has been elected to the Denver Broncos Ring of Fame, which of course coincides with him being elected to the Pro Football Hall of Fame, both in the year 2019.
Yeah, and he's the first Broncos player in history to get, both those honors in the same year. And it's, well-deserved. He's one of the best corners of all time. He's a Broncos legend. He deserves all these accolades that are coming to him. So I'm happy for him and happy for Broncos country to share this memory.
I still am just so regretful for him that he wasn't able to get a Super Bowl. But at least he played in one, right? He played in Super Bowl 48, the game that the Broncos got blown out by the Seahawks, basically. But at least he got that opportunity, and he got close one other time in 2005 when the Broncos got to the AFC Championship game with Jake Plummer and lost to the eventual world champion Pittsburgh Steelers. But that's really the only thing missing from his resume.
Yeah, he just left such a major mark, watching him growing up in my formative years, watching the NFL, watching Champ Bailey. He just left such a mark at the position. And even Vic Fangio addressed it today. He left an impression on him with his size, his combination of speed, his instincts, his ball skills. I mean, that's something that's still being talked about years after he last played a game. So he's an all-time player. And like I said, he deserves all the good coming to him right now.
Two last thoughts on Champ. I remember when he first arrived in Denver, Mike Shanahan, he was such a dynamic athlete and an explosive athlete. Mike Shanahan actually had a few packages on offense for him. And I remember when that trade was made for Clinton Portis, fans were really disappointed by that because even though Champ Bailey had established himself as a young Pro Bowl corner by that point, Clinton Portis was coming off of back-to-back seasons of 1,500 yards rushing, 2 Pro Bowls himself, and, let's face it, especially back then, the running back was a more high-profile position than corner. The Champ Bailey legend wasn't obviously what it would end up becoming, but Mike Shanahan talked about in the press that, we got a lot of things cooking and ideas and things in the works for Champ Bailey, and sure enough, that even the opening game of that season, he arrived in Denver, whatever it was, I think it was 2004. They ran some offensive plays with Champ Bailey, got him the ball. Some fans can remember exactly what I'm talking about. There's that. And then I also can remember when he first came to Denver, after a couple of years, and that's when he really hit his peak as a dominant shutdown, the premier corner in the NFL. I remember seeing posters that showed him and said Champ Bailey, 2/3 of the earth covered by water, the other third by Champ Bailey.
And what's funny is, not long from now, maybe even next year, he'll look up on the facade of Broncos Stadium and he'll see Mike Shanahan's name there too. By all indications, he's the next Ring of Fame inductee, and it's good that the Broncos are finally recognizing their legends, even if it took a little time.
And it's ridiculous. I don't want to derail the pod, but it's ridiculous Mike Shanahan is not already in the Ring of Fame.
Yeah, agreed.
And I'll be honest, I'm a little bit ignorant on what the strictures are for Ring of Fame qualifications exactly in terms of how long they maybe need to be out of the league or whatever before they can be inducted. But Shanahan's been out since whatever it is, 2013 was his last year with the Redskins? I believe so.
Yeah.
And so it's been a minute, right? And you think about the contribution Mike Shanahan made to this team. Not only was he the offensive coordinator on at least one of the Super Bowl teams in the 80s, I think it was the 89 squad, if I'm not mistaken, in which Broncos lost to the 49ers, but of course the back-to-back world championships in the late 90s, it should have been long ago that he was inducted into the Ring of Fame.
Yeah, and the Broncos haven't done an overwhelmingly great job honoring their legends. They're starting to kind of patch that up. You saw it in the last couple of years. You saw it with Bailey this year. You saw it with Al Wilson at the draft. They're starting to move in the right direction, but in certain instances, Chad, with Bailey and all that, they did drag their feet a little too much.
And that's one of the reasons, frankly, I believe Kyle Shanahan recoils at the notion that his system is a West Coast system. When he talks about it publicly, he'll use expletives to say, no, this isn't the effing West Coast offense that I run. And the reason why is because this is my take. I was just talking about this, in fact, on the phone with Doc Bear last week. We were talking about this, and I said, look, I think the reason why is because, Kyle Shanahan's system is basically built on the bones of his father's system, Mike Shanahan. And I think when people say, oh, it's the West Coast offense, even though Mike's system was informed by Bill Walsh, who was the progenitor of the West Coast, even though it was built on that, to call Kyle's system the West Coast offense, I think Kyle sees that as taking away from the legacy and its own thing that Mike's system had become. And there are differences, although they're minor, between what Walsh did and what Shanahan eventually did, including the zone blocking, including some of the more vertical aspects of Shanahan's system. But I think there's something to that Kyle's trying to, protect whatever legacy is there for Mike Shanahan and maybe try and push it to the forefront in a kind of passive-aggressive way. So it's good to me, even more so, that the Broncos, if this happens sooner than later, getting Mike into the ring.
Yeah, also, he's protecting his father, but also as a coach in the NFL now, he wants to become his own man with his own identity and differentiate himself. So he wants to say that I'm taking some aspects, some bare bones of my father's system. It's not this, it's not that. It's not going to be mischaracterized, but I'm also doing my own thing. I like how Kyle has approached that aspect.
We do have a lot to get to on today's show. The Denver Broncos kicked off week 2 of OTAs. We got to hear from Vic Fangio, Josey Jewell, and of course Courtland Sutton on Monday. We're going to go through some of the implications of what they had to say. But first, you guys, a couple of quick matters of business. Make sure you're following the show on Twitter at HuddleUpPod. It's the best way to keep your finger on the pulse of what's happening with the show in real time. And then don't forget to leave your creative review on iTunes. Give us that 5-star rating. It's a great way that you can help support the show. All right, Zach, let's talk about some of the quick takeaways from Vic Fangio's time at the podium on Monday. And I'm going to be writing about this later. By the time our listeners hear this, the article will be out there. But I wanted to get your take on what he had to say about DeMarcus Walker. And in fact, I'm not going to play the clip. I'll just read the quote. He was asked whether or not DeMarcus Walker is showing improvement, because there's questions as to whether or not he even fits Fangio's scheme. He's only appeared in 13 games in 2 years as a former second-round pick. Fangio basically said, quote, I'm not sure yet, but I do think that he's working extremely hard. I think he's making progress, and ultimately with D-line and O-line, you have to have the pads on to see. I like where he's at. I like where he's at emotionally, too. I think he's in a good spot emotionally. He's probably matured in the last couple of years, and we're going to see what he has or doesn't have here come training camp, close quote, which to me was both a positive in that, I think he's giving DeMarcus Walker an opportunity to start from square one in his eyes, right? But he's also acknowledging that, look, he's in a good spot emotionally, which implies that there might have been an issue there.
Yeah, I thought this was a fair answer and a fair assessment. It kind of is a shot to me at the Broncos' previous coaching staff where it let him devolve to that, and they moved him around so much and they toyed with him, and maybe that had a psychological aspect, an emotional aspect. It's clear that for the first couple years in the NFL, DeMarcus Walker did not have what it takes to see the field. Whether that's going to happen in Fangio's system, I agree with him. And not until you have contact a little bit, not until the games start going on. It's too soon. Some think he's miscast in the system. Other think, he has potential that can be unlocked. Chad, I'm a big DeMarcus Walker fan. I think he would personally do well under Vic Fangio, but Fangio confirming that there was something at play here other than just a numbers game or the weekly inactive list that led to him not playing. And we're finally starting to see it come to the forefront.
We both have optimistic views on what DeMarcus Walker can bring to the table, but if you can't thrive under Bill Collar and then Vic Fangio, it really is more than a failure to launch. It's just You don't have what it takes between the years probably to make it in the NFL. But I remain optimistic, and based on what Fangio is saying there, I do think he's given him a fair opportunity to prove that, look, these last 2 years, chalk it up more to the previous coaching staff, chalk it up more to being buried on a really crappy team, even though that has its own implications. Why aren't you playing? If it's that crappy of a team, you should be playing if you're a living legend, right? But bottom line is, aside from all that, I think it's encouraging because Fangio, like he talked about with watching film on current Broncos in the last season, he's like, look, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to watch film unless it's on a guy that we have to make a decision on, because he doesn't want to have preconceived notions. He wants to form his own opinions, and I think this is a clear indication he's doing just that with Walker.
And also the fact that Fangio has not been afraid at all to call anyone out, whether it's Von Miller last week or Devontae Bosby today. And the fact that he's kind of complimenting DeMarcus Walker, to me, reading between the lines, it bodes pretty well for his potential to at least contribute this season.
You brought it up. Devontae Bosby, who's received maybe not like positive remarks from Vic Fangio the few times he's been mentioned while Fangio's at the podium. But on Monday, he basically said that, he kind of, I wouldn't say threw him under the bus, but as you had in the article, he was critical of Devontae Bosby. And here's what he said, basically. He said, quote, "I think there's been a time or two in phase 2 where he's let the back-to-back season, we'll explain what that means, albeit shortened, give him a reason to think he's too tired to where he shouldn't do that. He has to overcome that. He has to overcome being his own worst enemy and show the player that he can be," close quote. So obviously what Fangio is alluding to there is he finished the NFL season, right, in 2018 and then jumped right into the AAF. And so now there's this idea that, I'm too tired, I've been run ragged, 2 back-to-back seasons, not being able to contribute 100%. What was your take on that, Zach?
No death by inches. And Fangio will do anything it takes to, keep that away. And Devontae Bosby, it's tough. It's a tough position, playing all those games straight, all those weeks straight. But he knew what he signed up for. He knew what was going to happen if that league crumbled, and it did. And he landed in a really good spot, Chad, with his former coach and Vic Fangio in one of the league's best secondaries. He has to take advantage of every snap with Chris Harris Jr. out, with Isaac Yiadom recovering from shoulder surgery. This is his time. It's a golden opportunity, and no matter how fatigued you are, how tired you are, you got to step up and rise to the challenge. So I am completely smitten with Fangio's viewpoint in that no coach speak, no platitudes, no BS, just tell it like it is.
Yes. So refreshing. It's an absolutely refreshing approach. And, it also speaks to the fact that, Bosby, you got to step your game up because Yiadom's about to hit the field again. He's been recovering from that shoulder injury that he suffered at the end of last season. And here's what Fangio said about Yiadom's recovery. He said, quote, "He started back today and did some individual work and did a little bit in 7-on-7. I don't think he partook in any of the teamwork, but hopefully we'll get him up to speed here quickly," close quote. So Yiadom's pretty much back in the saddle. They're going to ease him in a little bit. So if Bosby is not on his game, if he's not on point, if he's not, living up to the death by inches ethos, Yiadom's going to pass him up. He's already passed him in terms of his draft pedigree alone. He's going to be given more opportunities to succeed than Bosby's going to be on the surface. But it's just another guy, another iron in the fire that he has to try and compete with and set himself apart from.
I think if it shakes out now, Yiadom would be the 4th corner and Bosby would be the 5th, and they're going to carry at least 5. So Bosby has a good chance to make the team here. And even Fangio said he's going to be competing to make a spot on this team, which implies that he's going to be carried through the preseason. He's going to have a great chance here. He just cannot squander it, especially with 2 cornerbacks, Chad, out of the picture and another one playing safety half the time. He has to step it up.
Absolutely. A couple other things I want to jump on here from Fangio. He was asked about Ron Leary's recovery. And, of course, Ron Leary has been on the field for OTAs, for those who aren't, keeping track exactly. He's been on the field for OTAs. He's part of the group sessions. He's a part of the classroom work and all the meetings. But he's mostly working on the sideline with trainers as opposed to participating in team periods. Here's what Coach Fangio said about Leary, quote, "Hopefully Ron makes a full recovery from his injury, which I think he can and he will. Everything has been positive both from the medical people and from talking to him. We're hoping Ron makes it back. Hopefully we'll see him partaking by the last couple of practices before we go on break, and he'll be ready to go full speed at training camp," closed quote. So that's the trajectory Leary's on. It sounds like by the end of this OTA session, they want to be able to get him on the field at least for some of the team period.
Yeah, which is good. I mean, it's tough for any player to come back from an Achilles injury, and they have him and Emmanuel Sanders coming back to full health. My only thing is put him back at left guard now. There's no reason why you should have Reisner, at that side. Put him back at left guard, which is Leary's natural spot. Don't mess around there. That's what I hope can be the plan in training camp. But for now, in the interim, with these voluntary practices, at least encouraging that he's on the field, he's getting better. I just have questions where they're going to play him. That's all.
We also got to hear from Vic Fangio, the poet, when he was asked about Noah Fant and what he's seen on film. He said, quote, "Yeah, he can run. We all knew that. That was easy. But now he has to learn how to be a tight end in the NFL. He's got tools, but, I can go into Home Depot and walk out with a bunch of nice tools, and I'm not a carpenter. We have to teach him how to be a tight end in the NFL, and he's working great at it, close quote. So I love the analogy. It made me chuckle when I heard him deliver it. But what do you think the implications are of what he's really trying to say there, Zach?
That it takes more than just looking good in a uniform and catching passes. And he's right. I mean, there's a mental component to it. It's a daily thing. You have to work at your craft every single day. And nothing is going to be handed to Fant, even though he was a first-round draft pick. He's not even guaranteed to be the starter, let alone be a star. So, yeah, keep at it. Keep that hammer knocking those nails every single day. And before you know it, you'll build up a nice career for yourself.
For what it's worth, and we're going to talk about Josey Jewell's remarks here on the other side of the break, but the last thing I want to say before we do that is what Josey had to say about Noah Fant. He said, quote, "He's a dude. He's a pretty fast tight end. He's kind of like one of those hybrid guys, but not a lot of people give him credit for his blocking. I think he does a great job blocking also. His route tree is pretty good, and he can just flat out run. He's going to be a mismatch for some people," close quote. So that's another thing that I've been trying to explain to fans ever since that pick was made, is that there's more of a foundation there as a blocker from Noah Fant than the average, pass-catching, explosive athlete that comes out of college at the position. There's something to work with there, and Josey Jewell would know. He played with him for 2 years at Iowa before they both ended up in the NFL.
And what we talked about, Chad, on a previous pod, is covering Fant every day in practice is going to make Jewell a better player. So it's really a good position for both them to be in right now.
All right, like you said, we got a couple more things we want to touch on from Courtland Sutton and Josey Jewell, but first we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Huddle Up podcast listeners, check this out. If you've been thinking about becoming a Mile High Huddle VIP subscriber, now's the time to do it. We have a phenomenal offer to get your foot in the door as a new VIP. Right now, you can get your first month of VIP for $1. That's insane value, and it immediately gives you access to all of the premium content we produce. If you want to subscribe for the year, new annual subscribers will get 30% off the cost of a membership. Never before have we been able to offer new subscribers this kind of introductory incentive to pull the trigger. This is how you get access to our VIP mailbags every Friday. Zach and I answer each and every question from our VIPs, even if it means an episode goes a little bit long. Jumping on this offer also gives you 100% access to every piece of content we produce on the front page, including our Broncos film room breakdowns and every other form of deep dive Broncos content our site is known for. VIPs also get entry into our members-only MHH Insiders Forum, where you hear the insider buzz first from our talented and plugged-in staff, and you get to engage with other passionate and knowledgeable fans just like you. Becoming a VIP subscriber, you guys, it's the best way to support the work and the time Zach and I put into producing a daily podcast for your listening pleasure and edification. So go to milehighhuddle.com, click on the green banner, choose monthly or annual, and you are locked in. The regular season will be here before you know it, so jump on one of these offers, Broncos country.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
All right, Zach, since we talked about Jewell last to close out the first segment, let's hit him first, then we'll talk about Sutton. I thought it was interesting, and I wrote about this after the press conference, but the idea of whether or not Josey Jewell is a fit for the Vic Fangio scheme. There have been some doubts and some questions as to whether or not he is. And although I've tried to kind of pump the brakes on those doubts and concerns, I think he is a good fit. Jewell addressed that head on in his presser today, which was the first time we've gotten to hear from Josey Jewell since the Vic Fangio hire. And when he was asked directly on whether or not his style fits Fangio, he said, quote, "I hope so. Only he can answer that one. I definitely hope that's what he's looking for. I'm definitely working on a lot of parts of my game here today and through these OTAs," close quote. So there's certain aspects of his game that he's putting a little extra and additional effort into in order to more closely fit the demands of what Fangio needs at the off-ball linebacker position in his defense. But Zach, I see Josey Jewell, and I wrote about this, as a very similar player as the former Wisconsin standout Chris Borland, who was drafted by the Niners when Fangio was there. It was Fangio's last season in San Francisco. He was drafted there in the 3rd round. He only played that 1 year, Borland, before he retired, with a lot of media scrutiny over the concern of concussions. But in that 1 year, Zach, he didn't even start all 16 games. He started 8 games, added up over 100 combined tackles. 84 of them were solo. He had a couple of picks. He defensed, like half a dozen passes. He produced quite a bit in a single season. And I think the scheme fit are pretty similar, and it might be the tangible fits are pretty similar. The comparisons between Jewell and Borland. And I think, obviously, Borland, one of the reasons, Zach, he was so successful in his one and only year there under Fangio in San Francisco is he's going to benefit from that Fangio bump, which we've talked about quite a bit. And the same applies for Josey Jewell.
Yeah, I mean, they're both toolsy players. It's a good comparison. They're both very much alike. They're not going to be all pros. They're not Patrick Willis's, Reuben Foster types. They're not 3-down linebackers. But to use that Home Depot analogy, they're Swiss Army knives. They can do it all for this defense. And what makes them effective players is what the weaknesses that they have in physical talent is made up for in coaching. That's the difference between the Broncos last year and the Broncos this year with Vic Fangio. And that's what he thinks he can get out of Josey Jewell. There's a reason they didn't sign an inside linebacker, draft one. He admitted, Fangio, early this offseason that he did watch tape of Jewell last year with the Bears. He's already familiar with them. That's one player he's mentioned by name this offseason. It's clear, based on the moves and the non-moves they made, that Josey Jewell figures into their plans. But he's never going to be, fans thinking he's never going to be this Devin Bush, Devin White type. That's not who he is. But he's good enough to succeed. You can win with him. And with good coaching, like you mentioned with Borland and Vic Fangio, I mean, you can really, really turn into a solid starter. You can't have all pros at every spot. But if you have solid playmaker, lunch pail types, those are the championship defenses and the players that you need.
That wouldn't surprise me, though, honestly, because of his football IQ and his motor, that Josey Jewell becomes that type of player under Fangio. Now, I don't want to get too far into the weeds of hyperbole there, but you made a great point, too, Zach, that, for whatever athletic, I don't even want to call them deficiencies. You compare a Josey Jewell, for example, with a guy like Devin White. Devin White's going to jump out of the gym. He's going to beat him in the 40. He's a much more explosive, quick twitch type of athlete. But what's going to bridge the gap between the type of player Josey Jewell is and that natural ability that a guy like Devin White wakes up with in the morning, gets out of bed, and he has those natural gifts, is that coaching that Fangio brings to the table, that Fangio bump. And so that's really encouraging, and that's a great point. He also talked, Josey Jewell, about some of the differences between the scheme, obviously, that they ran last year under Joe Woods and Vance Joseph and Fangio's scheme. And he talked about how they're similar in terms of philosophy where, basically Joe Woods was running the same type of scheme that he learned from Wade Phillips in that the front seven is very much an attacking front seven. But there are some huge differences in terms of what the back seven, what their responsibilities are in terms of coverage. And here's what he said, quote, "With a bunch of different coverages that he has, talking about Fangio, and the way he disguises things, sometimes a quarterback is not going to show what you're in and is not going to know." Hold on, let me do that again. Here's what he said, quote, "With a bunch of different coverages that he has and the way he disguises things, sometimes a quarterback is not going to know what you're in and not going to know where to pick on you at. Say you're in cover 3 and he thinks you're in man or something like that. He's not going to be able to pick it out and know exactly where to go right away and have those quick throws," close quote. So it's very important to Vic Fangio, Zach, that they disguise the coverage pre-snap, and then from there you see a pretty solid mix between man and zone coverage, which gives those quarterbacks that, even the great ones like Tom Brady, that additional half second or however long of pause that allows the rush to get to him.
And what's so encouraging to me is Von Miller mentioned last week that this defense is not just dependent now on the no-fly zone holding it down. 3 different levels of the defense make it work now with Vic Fangio. They can get after the quarterback. They can stop opponents using all 3 levels. I love the potential mismatches and the havoc they can create with Vic Fangio. And that's why when you have someone like Josey Jewell, who just fits in where he gets in, you cannot have enough of those players, Chad.
And I love what Josey Jewell had to say, too, before we move on here to Courtland Sutton, about the attention he did or didn't pay to the NFL draft, because the Broncos were so tied to the top off-ball guys, the Devons, right, in the top of the draft throughout the pre-draft process. And you have to wonder what an incumbent starter at that position like Josey Jewell is thinking, similarly to Joe Flacco, right? What are you going to do if they draft a quarterback high? You got to wonder what Josey Jewell was thinking. And he admitted that he was paying a little bit of attention to what was happening in the draft. However, he said it was mostly due to the fact that there were a couple of high-profile Iowa guys that might be going. And, of course, Zach, one of them landed in Denver in Noah Fant. But basically he admitted that, quote, "Whoever they picked, they were going to pick. So I was just going to work my butt off every day and just go with it, close quote, which that last point, I believe, even more so. He's just a guy that even if you come in and a player's maybe a little bit more blessed naturally, a little bit more talented, he's going to find a way to outwork you. He's going to find a way to outsmart you in the classroom.
Yeah, and he's not stupid either. He's not oblivious. He knew the Broncos were linked heavily to Devin Bush, and it surprised a lot of people when they did not draft him. But I like the attitude. I mean, it's out of his control. It's not in his responsibility what players come in. He can only do what he's assigned to do and the best job he can do. And I like that attitude.
All right, let's talk about not a whole lot to hash out with regard to Courtland Sutton, but there are a couple interesting things he had to say about the quarterback, Zach. And one of them, what I thought was interesting, was what he was asked what stands out about Joe Flacco. Now he's had quite a few practices out on the grass to work with Flacco. And instead of reading this long quote for our listeners, I'm going to go ahead and play the Courtland Sutton clip here talking about what stands out with Joe Flacco.
I think a lot of people underestimate his athleticism. I think that's one thing that a lot of people underestimate. I think they think he's just like a sit back there and throw it, but he can move in the pocket and he has so much confidence in his arm. And that's one thing I really enjoy, being able to having him be really comfortable with his throws and knowing he knows where he can get the ball to, and he's willing to make those throws and take those chances. And those things that I like, because there are times where as a receiver we feel like we're open and there's a small window, but if you don't have a quarterback that trusts that window, then you won't get it. So having him trust his arm as much as he does and have confidence in us and building that confidence every day with the reps, it's awesome.
All right, Zach, so that's not exactly something I expected to hear, that people are underestimating Joe Flacco's athleticism, because after all, he's known as being the quintessential pocket statue.
I don't really know about this comment. I mean, is he basing it on a couple practices and OTAs or what? But it's like everything that we know about Joe Flacco. He's a big arm. He's on the biggest stage, but he does not have good pocket presence. He does not have good mobility. It's just not his game. So I guess you got to take the word of Courtland Sutton, who's there with him every day, but I'll believe that when I see that, Chad.
Yeah, and I think, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but what I kind of interpreted when he's talking about athleticism, guys like you and I think most people interpret that to mean like mobility, right, from a quarterback. But I think what he was actually trying to say was he was talking more about his arm strength, and because in that quote, obviously, he's talking about making throws and taking chances and fitting the ball in and stuff like that. And that's something that Courtland Sutton hasn't played with a quarterback who has an arm as strong as Joe Flacco so far.
Yeah, no question about the arm strength and getting the ball into the windows he talked about. That's Joe Flacco. That's no comparison to Case Keenum. That's the only thing that Courtland Sutton has known to go on in the NFL is Case Keenum. There's no comparison there. But to say that his athleticism is underrated, I'm calling kind of BS on that one.
And then last thing I want to touch on here, and then we'll get out of here for today, is what Sutton had to say about Drew Lock. Here's the quote.
Drew's nice. Drew's doing what he's supposed to do. He's learning, and he's taking every rep that he can as serious as he possibly should and could at this point in time. It's still really early. I've got to see him for I think 2 weeks now, and he's doing the things he's supposed to do. He's improving and he's making the throws he's supposed to throw, and he's just learning the system. That's the biggest thing. He's just trying to learn the system just like us, and once he gets it, he'll get more comfortable and he'll be able to start distributing the ball around like he really wants to.
All right, so what were your impressions of Sutton there, the implications of what he had to say about Drew Lock? Other than, Drew's doing what he's supposed to do right now. He's learning. That's his job right now.
I think it's important after last week's little brouhaha about, the mentoring and the supposed fabricated competition in Denver. It's what he should be doing. He's sitting back. He's absorbing the offense. He's putting time in the classroom on the practice field, and he's bonding with his teammates, not causing any trouble. He's putting his head down. What more could you ask at this point?
Fair point. I don't disagree. And Drew Lock, he talked about in that quote last week, I think it was the one from TMZ, and I know you had the article on it, but he basically said that Joe's responsibility right now is, in fact, to win games for this team. Mine is to learn. And that's something that in his quote there that Sutton basically echoed. So, Lock's getting in where he fits in. You want to use that phrase. That's a perfect explanation of what Lock's brief is right now. And, all fans can really do as it relates to Lock is just look forward to getting to see him in 5 preseason games this summer.
I also like the fact that, last week's comments didn't reverberate negatively in the Broncos locker room. He can differentiate Locke and also Joe Flacco. And Sutton gave him a nice answer, Locke. He didn't just give him a 2-sentence thing. He said he's nice, doing what he should be doing. He'll get more comfortable. I mean, it's encouraging. I mean, the Broncos locker room is a lot more stable than I think some people are thought to believe.
But as he said toward the end of that quote, once he's more comfortable and he's learned the system, he's going to be able to distribute the ball around like he really wants to. And obviously that's what the Broncos are hoping to from Drew Lock eventually, but he's going to have to bide his time because old man Flacco's got the job for now. We'll see how long that lasts. But you guys, that's going to do it for today's episode of the Huddle Up Podcast. Like we said yesterday, we're not going to stretch these off-season pods beyond the material we have to analyze just to draw it out. All right, so hope you enjoyed today's pod. Make sure you're following the show on Twitter at HuddleUpPod. And leave your creative review on iTunes. Give us that 5-star rating. You can find my partner, Zack Kelberman, on Twitter at Kelberman247. Myself at Chad and Jensen. Stay tuned because Building the Broncos will be back on tomorrow with a fresh episode. I think they are projecting and looking ahead at the 2018 class, what they can do in 2019 or in year 2. So stay tuned for that. And then Zack and I will be back on the other side on Thursday. In the meantime, for Zack Kelberman, I'm Chad Jensen. We'll talk to you soon.
You've been listening to the Huddle Up Podcast. Join Broncos Country's deep divers at milehighhuddle.com to keep the conversation going.